Okay, this time on Captain Chaos's laboratory, we're going to be working on Department 56 piece. It's actually a pretty cool looking piece. It doesn't work, that's why it's sitting on the bench. But it's from Department 56. It's a animated Hocus Pocus witch. So I'm wondering if it was maybe an addition to the Hocus Pocus, the Hocus Pocus house that they kind of had. I know that's not the name of the house, but it was on the front. So anyhow, problem with Department 56 is they take C batteries. And it's not a common battery used for a lot of things. So instead of me going to dig out some C batteries, I just have my power supply hooked up at 3 volts to the battery box. So, turn it on. I'll kill some light here so it's a little easier to see. It lights up. So you can see light on, off. The problem is, there, on. The light does fade in and out, so it kind of gives the appearance of the fire, moving. And the eyes on the skull flash, which hopefully you can see. The problem is, this is supposed to be turning. This cauldron with the broom, which I'm sure they're using as a stir stick, isn't moving. So you can see I can wobble it, but it doesn't turn. I can't get it to turn either direction. So what's probably gone on is the motor that is down in here has gone bad, which is pretty common on Department 56. Let me turn this thing off. Turn off power to it and get a little closer to the camera. If you kind of look closely, there's a seam right here. So I'm assuming the bottom comes out. There's nothing under the sticker, so there's no indentations, but there's a seam and it feels like it's got glue. So I'm probably going to try and have to heat this area up and see if I can pop the bottom out to get to the motor and the lights. So that's going to be the next step, is slowly, as best as I can, carefully heating this up and seeing if I can get this to separate. The reason I don't like doing this is all resin, and this is why Department 56 is so hard to repair. They make their stuff virtually impossible to fix. They probably feel it never breaks, and they have the same process as Lemax. You can't fix it, buy a new one, the whole nine. I've dealt with their customer service too, asking for any assistance on their products. But their seams are much tighter than Lemax. You can hear my fingernail catching it, but I can't get even the spudger in there. They are super tight. They do have a little bit better quality, and that's probably part of the reason why they don't want you fixing them, is because the chance of it coming apart unscathed is probably very slim. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a moderate temperature, 150 degrees Celsius, and I'm going to start heating up the edges and see if this thing will start to separate, and then I'll work my way up. I'm going to try and do it without damaging this outer edge where the paint is, because there's no access from the top. The only other thing I can figure is heating up this area and taking the cauldron off. Literally heating it up and snapping it off and then gluing it back on. This cauldron doesn't physically move, just the parts in the middle. So you can break the cauldron and then maybe walk it up. It looks like you could clear her hands. I don't want to go that route yet. I know, like on Frankenstein's Laboratory, which is one I'm also working on, the only way to get in there to fix the lighting system is you have to heat up the top of the house and separate it from the bottom of the house, because there's no access on the bottom. Not even a seamed area like this. Yeah, Department 56, they make some really tight seams, and they make some really hard products to get into. Which is why you don't see too many on here. One, nobody ever wants to fix them because they're, well, expensive. And two, they take a lot to get into. I still have some I've worked on and will work on, and this is the next one I'm going to attempt to repair. So as soon as I can figure out how to get into this, we'll be back. Okay, I'm back. Alright, I got it nice and toasty. I had to bump it up to 200 degrees Celsius. But as soon as I did that, I'm going to bring it up to the camera. Pieces, there's actually glue seam, and in the corners, this was just paint. It's not chipped. This was filled with glue and then painted, and the paint bubbled right off, and I could see that's where you can actually probably pry it open. That's probably how they set it down and shot glue inside. I have not pulled it out yet because it's still glued. As you can see, I'm holding it. So I wanted you to see the process once you heat all that glue, because the other issue is this cord. Unless there's slack in here, it's going to break the cord, because the cord is a different shade because they also resin and glued the cord in. So I might have to heat that. Yeah, it's a softer material. But before I do that, I want to see if there's any slack inside. There appears to be some. You can see here some of the glue that's holding it. There's glue there. So there's glue here and glue here. And now I am caught on the cord. So let's see. What I'm going to do, instead of heating it up and ruining this nice green paint job for the cord, I'm going to mark one wire and where it was on, and I'm going to desolder the motor. I have enough room to get in there. If you don't have the ability to do this, then yes, heat this area up. Try not to melt the wires. And pull the cord through. Whenever you desolder, you generally have to put fresh solder on top of it, or else it won't come apart easy. Add a little bit more light to what I'm doing. Apparently my soldering iron is getting hot fast. Clean the tip. There we go. Sorry, my soldering iron, I had to reset the station. It was detecting a temperature error. There we go. Let me see if I can get it with my finger first. Nope. Okay, that's the first wire. This isn't very easy, but I think it's going to preserve the outside appearance, whereas I don't really want to damage the resin and then, you know, you have a clear glue spot. There we go. So the two wires are now off. And there's the insides. And it says K30. I have no idea if that's somebody's, you know, quality control number or not. So, desolder the wires from the motor, and if you soldered them backwards, it just means it would spin backwards, but it would cause the LED not to function. So, there's a gearbox in here, and it's held together with glue. And then here's the two LEDs that illuminate the fire. And then this is clear right here, and the bottom of the disc is opaque, so when they shine up, not only do they illuminate this, they illuminate this edge to give the glow on the inside of the pot. So pretty nifty there. I'm going to just see which way this is supposed to function. That way. So I can try and hear the motor. That motor is not spinning. I believe that motor is bad. Should be able to see the lights. These power wires are soldered to the motor, and then of course you see the little red and black jumper wire that goes off, which goes to the circuit board. This little circuit board has a resistor and a capacitor on the top. Looking at it from the side, I can see a blob chip, which is probably the pulsing pattern and the flashing light for the skull, because the skull strobes. So this has a bad motor. Also, red is probably the hot, black is probably the negative. So in case you're wondering why I made the one on the left red with my Sharpie, so I can match them up in case it had a bad motor, I knew it was the one on the left, just in case I forget. So next step is, this doesn't appear to be screwed together, but I'm going to have to get in here to get the front of this motor out. So I'm going to take this circuit board off first to see if there is a screw underneath the circuit board. This all appears to just be hot glue, so technically if I heat it or carefully pry up on it, I should be able to separate it. This glue right here is not even attached, it's separated from the motor. The motor probably got hot enough to break the glue. Here we go. Hopefully you can see. There's the blob chip and the circuitry, and if you notice the glue is two different colors, is because the glue is breaking down. A lot of glue turns yellow when it breaks down, when it's hot glue or hot melt glue. There are no screws that is underneath this, but I wanted to check. What I'm going to do though is scrape off the glue that's still stuck to the side of the motor. Probably just scrape it all off because we're going to have to glue it back down anyway. The dark yellow stuff, or the yellow colored glue, breaks off easy. The white glue, or the whitish clear, is stretchy because it's still got its elasticity in it. Alright, now I'm going to work around the edge on the glue seam to separate this. Let's see if this is hard glued onto the shaft. There is hard, like super glue type material. So I'm trying not to take the boiling cauldron part off if I don't have to. I'm hoping the mechanism that it's attached to inside the gearbox is attached to the top. we go. That side's popped. I normally recommend that you try this without heat at first, because this is plastic, and if you heat it too long or too hard, you can warp it and damage the LEDs. There we go. And yes, the mechanism is attached, so the gear is pressed on. That's good. And I'm going to say the motor definitely went bad because all this black right at the end of the motor, I'm going to take it all out in just a second, looks like the motor has burned out. And this motor is glued in. There are no screws, it's just glue, and it's a really hard glue. It's probably a super glue. Since I know the motor is going to be the bad part because it wasn't spinning, I'm going to desolder the wires off the motor just so I can get this part away and I'm less likely to damage it. Solder. I think my soldering iron's starting to go bad. Looks like I'm going to have to buy a new one. The machine says it's 330 degrees Celsius, which would, well, yeah, I can touch it and there's no heat. Reset the unit. Yeah, it's telling me that it's insta-hot, meaning it didn't have to heat up, that it instantly turned on at 330 degrees. Which means that the sensor inside here has gone out. Yeah, because I shouldn't be able to touch it with my fingers. I'll tighten it and see if that helps. There we go. I had to bump it up to 400, which is excessive. So I think the sensor that's telling the machine how hot this unit is gone bad. Perfect. Always in the middle of filming. So. Not a problem. I have other soldering devices. Alright. So, I'm going to move that out of the way to prevent any damage. Here is the gearbox. This little gear right here goes on top of this stud. You can see it. It's just a little hobby motor. It's not a round hobby motor that everybody's used to seeing. This is, I don't know, was a standard hobby motor when I was growing up. The flat top and bottom. But the black on the teeth of the gear is coming from the nose right in here, which indicates that the brush, because these are brush motors, and the black is probably the carbon from the brushes, has come out. The motor's burned up. And just to show you, I have my voltmeter set at 3 volts, since we know that's a 3-volt motor. Oh, look at that. Now it's starting to turn. It wasn't at first. Yeah, see, it stopped again. So, yeah, it's telling me it's pulling a load, but it's not turning. But if I turn it by hand, it starts. Stop, restart, starts. Okay, so I'll show you up close. So I'm touching it and it's not moving. So it is dying. When it doesn't start when I first touch it, like now, it says it's pulling 0.1 amps. So it's drawing some good power. Then if I rotate it to where it starts spinning like that, now it's 0.01 amps, which is what this motor should draw. So it's a bad motor. The brushes inside are getting weak, or the wires that are soldered to these pads from inside the motor's winding have started to separate. Either way, you have to replace the motor. But the big issue is going to be getting the motor out without damaging this plastic base. First I'm going to do is get the gears out, less likely to lose and or break them. So there's no glue on the sides. There's a little bit of glue right here, which is now off. But there is a thick layer of glue right down there. So I'm thinking they use the hard glue. I would, because it's a motor and the hard glue is less susceptible to heat. Let's see if I can work around. Take your time, work around the edges. You should hear it cracking. It's cracking the glue. Find any spot you can to grab the motor and pry against the base. I'm trying to use my finger as support so I don't bend the base. I can always put it on a table and do the same thing. I have it lifted so I can see it better, and also maybe you guys can too. There we go. Now she's really starting to come out. So, here we go. Here's the base. The base is discolored because of the aluminum casing. And if you look at the motor, right in here, you'll see it's got black. That's the brush material. Brushes are black. They are solid carbon. And it's coming out of one of those two vent holes on the top. So, we need a little 3-volt, ooh, and it doesn't even feel good. Most motors, when you spin them, they're smooth. This is very chunky. So, this one needs a motor. Not a big deal. We just need to find a motor of the same size that can run at 3 volts. Most of these hobby motors are rated for 3 volts, so that's a good thing. There is a number stamped on the back. Get my squints on here. And it says 1 watt. You know what? I'm going to use an old trick. Well, can't find a pencil. But if you can't read text, you can color the text and then wipe it off. Works good with pencil. Now let's see what it says. Techni motor. Copyright. That's all it says. And then it has a, it looks like an Asian symbol, probably the name of the company from over in China or Japan. T-E-C-H-N-I-M-O-T-O-R, Techni-Motor. That's what it says on the back. And this, like I said, is an old trick. It works really good with a pencil. You can rub a pencil on it, wipe it off, and you'll be able to read text when you have text that blends into a motor or anything. There are no part numbers on the outside. It's 104 microfarad capacitor, which is just a noise suppression. Kind of important because the LEDs will pick up the motor's windings, because the motor windings expand and collapse, so your LEDs will flicker. That's why they have this here. That's probably also why they have it on the circuit board, is to absorb noise. So when you get a new motor, desolder and resolder this capacitor on. It doesn't matter which way it goes on. This capacitor is not polarized, so if you flip it, it doesn't care. So, all right. Well, I'm going to pause the video and try and find a motor, and then we'll go from there. Of course, reassembly, we're going to glue it back together, put it all back together, and then test it, and hopefully this little Hocus Pocus witch will be back together. Then it can go back to its owner. Shall return. All right, that was a quick pause. Literally took me 20 seconds to find it. This is another Technique motor. It's the same motor. It's a slightly newer one because it came out of a more modern piece of equipment. The back's red versus white. The shaft is longer. You'll probably be able to see that. The shaft is physically longer. Motor's same dimensions. It's just got a red butt versus a white butt. The shaft appears to be the same size. So to remove the gear, I'm going to pry using these 45-degree pliers up on it to bring it to slide off. And then we're going to press it onto this shaft. Now, before I started the video, I did verify that if I shove this right here, that the shaft being long will not hit the plastic, which is pretty obvious it doesn't. So, what that does mean, though, is I need to put these gears back in, at least one of them, so I can find the center, or the part of the shaft I need to press this onto. So that one goes there. Put the motor in, and then put this guy back on. And what you want, ideally, is you want the most meat right in the center. So I have it pressed on almost perfectly. It looks like I could pull it back a hair. And it is a tight fit because it's the right motor. It's the same dimension, so it's a tight fit in there. So slide it back up a little bit. On this shaft was actually recessed in the hole, so this shaft technically was too short. It doesn't matter as long as it has a good enough grip. That looks good. So, we're going to test it. Positive. And this already has the 104 microfarad capacitor on it, so I don't have to swap that over or get another one. Negative. And I'm going to put my finger up here so this gear doesn't walk off the shaft. It's spinning right along. This motor has got a slightly higher torque rating. This motor, when it was running, was only drawing 1/100 of an amp. This one draws 3/100 of an amp, and that's why it's a little louder. It's a slightly stronger motor, so technically it should last longer. So, but she fits nice and tight. So I'm going to lift it back up since we know it works, and I have the gear finally centered with one small adjustment. And I'm going to put a dab of super glue underneath this, or excuse me, I use Gorilla Glue, and pop this back down. And then we're going to start the reassembly process, which is going to require a hot glue gun. I use the brush, so I'm just going to brush in the same outline they had before with the discoloration from the aluminum. Just cleaning off the other one and press it on in there. Make sure it's nice and tight. And like I said, this one, when you spin it, it's real chunky feeling. It goes click, 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 click. That one, you spin it, it's really smooth. So it's a Techni motor. It's this motor here. When I got it, they were rated 3 to 6 volt. You can run them as low as 1.5. I don't recommend it because it's outside of its torque range at that point. But it's a 3 to 6 volt motor. I used to buy these all the time for RC cars because this was used for the servo steering motor. And that's probably why I still have some left over. So now we're going to try the soldering iron again. See if it works. And I'm going to put some fresh solder onto the connections here. Basically, I'm going to tin them. I'm going to get them tinned and ready for reinsertion into the unit. And I'm gonna re-tin these guys too. Here we go. My last soldering station, I had to throw it away. Actually, I gave it to somebody else because the soldering pen, after replacing it 3 times, it quit working 100%. The person I gave it to miraculously found the part that I couldn't find and was able to fix it, so they're all happy. But I bought a bigger one. I bought one that does more. I wanted to upgrade anyway, so they gave me an excuse. You get the hot glue gun plugged in because they take a little bit to get hot. I wish I had one of those new Insta-Hot ones, but I don't. And I'm going to prep this. So if you have this piece or something similar from Department 56 that has a rotating mass and it quits spinning, most likely you have a bad motor. If you hear clicking, you probably broke one of the 3 gears here. This big gear would be really hard to break. It's that rolling mass thing. The rolling mass is going to be harder to break on something that spins slower because it's much larger. I mentioned the rolling mass or spinning mass a lot, especially when it comes to carousels and Ferris wheels. As tempting as it is, I would not glue this back together with super glue or Gorilla Glue, because if you ever have to fix it, since I showed you how to do it, because the motor is not going to last forever. Brush motors have a shorter lifespan than like brushless motors. You're going to have a much harder time. Sorry about that. You're going to have a much harder time getting it. Much harder time getting it apart with super glue than you would with hot glue. So while it's heating up, just clean up your area. You know, that way you can re-glue the circuit board down. You can re-glue the cap back on. You can use tweezers, or I'm using the snips because it can dig into the soft glue. The grease in here is good. The staining of the gears is common. You've probably seen stained gears and stained pulleys, especially on Lemax when the belts shred. Staining is staining, but there's no debris in here. It's just blobs of grease. Apparently I forgot to mute my phone. Of course, that's when everybody's going to start messaging. There we go. Ever since the live stream I did with Doug over at Spooky Villages, the phone goes off a lot. So A lot of people asking for assistance, which is not a problem. I will try and help as best as I can, since I've been fixing my own for, I don't know, 7-8 years, and fixing other ones on YouTube for about 4, since I can't get help from anybody over at the Lemax plant or Department 56 plant. So just running a bead around the edge like they had, and get it off the gear. Squish it in, making sure that the shafts all line up. That click you might have just heard is this outcropping here and here are actually snap fingers. It actually snaps onto the base. So it just popped into place. I'm now going to put a small drop right here for the circuit board. Plug my glue gun. There we go. The only thing I don't like about glue guns is they get on everything, especially if you run them across your, meter probes. So that motor will go into the motor pile. Believe it or not, all these little bad motors I replace constantly in these things. I actually just take them to a motor recycling center so they don't end up in the landfill. They pay you by the pound, so I take other stuff there, so it adds up, helps offset. But usually on hobby motors, it's literally like 25-30 cents. But I'd rather it be recycled than buried. Alright, looks like we got a good connection on the top and bottom. It's square all the way around. I don't see any lifted areas. I'm just going to remove some of the snot on the sides. Now the only thing I won't be able to do when I put this back in the bottom is fill in the gap where the glue had paint on it. I mean, I can put a dab of white paint on it, but it's not going to look the same. I don't think the owner honestly is going to care. I will ask her, because I know most people would rather have a functioning unit with a little bit of issues on the bottom than a non-functioning unit. Try and get a lot of this glue out of here. Yep, I got an error on my soldering iron. It says that the heat sensor has gone out. Try it one more time. There we go. So I might be able to get most of this finished. I'm going to have to change soldering irons. And then see if I can find a replacement for my unit. If you're bored, you can go on eBay or Amazon and look up soldering stations. That's what I use. Soldering station, this one has power supply. It goes up to 15.7 volts DC at 2 amps. It has a USB at 5 volts at 2 amps. It has a soldering pen which goes up to 480 degrees Celsius, and a soldering air gun, the heat gun. That is, I think it goes up to like 500 and some odd degrees Celsius. All rolled into one with a variable speed fan, and then it can send voltage out or read voltage in. So it's a big unit that sits in the corner off camera. I use the snot out of it, which is why I've had to replace them before. And that's the clicking you hear, is me turning on the different functions, because I don't leave them on all the time, because if these smack each other, it does that. It gets annoying. So, there we go. So we got the flashing green light in the skull, we got the motor turning, the broom, and we got the pulsating lights. So this unit at peak draw draws 1/8 of an amp. At least it does now, because again, it's a little bit heavier duty motor, draws a little bit more power. I don't have the lighter duty motor that I took out. Unfortunately, I can't replace it with the exact OEM. So now I'm just going to clean out the rest of the glue, slide it back in, resolder the wires, and then run a bead of hot glue and push it back together. It's basically opposite of what I did when I took it apart. So once I have it all screwed back, glued back together, I will be back, because I'm probably gonna have to switch my soldering iron out, and I'm sure you don't want to sit and wait and watch me, you know, switch out a soldering iron. So I'll return in just a moment. Okay, we're back. Bottom's back on, and you can see the gaps where the paint was filled in. You can use a white acrylic paint and fill it back in. This glue right here, I just left in there and just heated it with the heat gun so it would read here, so that way this whole side wasn't exposed. But it's back and it's nice and flush. So I have the power hook back up, because again, don't have any C batteries. Let me turn off the light so you can see what it looks like. So there's the flashing skull eyes, the pulsating fire. You can see that it's rotating. It is kind of noisy. I have a piece like this from Lemax. It's very similar. It's just as noisy. I can't stand that, but nothing I can do. If I had the weaker motor, it'd be slightly quieter, but it functions. Bring it up to the camera. You can see functions smoothly. So this should have like a rubber mat underneath it, because it vibrates more on the table. So if it had like a piece of felt, or if you stuck it on one of those mats that has the moss mats that like Lemax has. So, but there it is. That is how you access this piece and probably several other similar pieces. Find the seam and just get it hot. Take a heat gun, work around the seam until it starts to separate. I used a spudger, which you've seen me use 100 times, and a little blade screwdriver. And once I found where the glue was weak and I was able to pry out the glue, I was able to slowly pry around the edge until it would separate. So this piece is now done. So I can now send it back to its owner. Matter of fact, the noises from my phone, because I forgot to turn it off, was actually the owner of this piece, talking about another piece I'm working on. So that's quite ironic. I was interrupted while fixing her piece. So not a big deal. It happens. Everybody's forgot to turn their volume off doing something at some point. So put it all back in. So if you have any questions, just put them below or send me an email. As far as pieces similar to this from Department 56, They're all probably going to be the same. You're going to have an area that you can probably take the glue and separate it. There we go. Didn't have it in all the way. Still went down a little bit, like that. And heat gun. I don't know if a hairdryer is going to get hot enough. It might. But if a hairdryer doesn't get hot enough, use a heat gun and work your way around the edges. Heat pen works better, only because it's a more centralized piece of heat, whereas on a heat gun, I always hate these sleeves. Whereas a heat gun, you still have a large nozzle like a hairdryer. There we go. Never understood why they use sleeves and not boxes like everybody else. So there you go. Village accessory, animated Hocus Pocus witch from the Halloween. Item number 56.52516. That's how you take the bottom off and get into it and replace it with a little hobby motor. It's a standard hobby motor with flat sides. You can get them virtually anywhere. And you just want to make sure that it's rated for, 3 volts. 3 to 6 is the standard. And you'll be good to go. Okay, thanks for watching. Until the next one.